Folk tales are generally accepted as not true, but they contain values that have the ring of truth. So Puss in Boots may feature a talking cat. That's not true. But it also presents cleverness as a virtue. Quite true. And this has been true since the beginning of time. And what has also been true is the close bonds that many of us have formed with our own animal companions, our pets, or the animals we rely on to help cultivate or provide our food for us. Maybe our service dogs or our guard dogs. Now, they don't speak to us as we do to each other, but we all have, on occasion, spoken our own language to our animals and interpreted a response. And sometimes we can even imagine our animals need to learn the same lessons that we do, giving a rise to animal fables, such as Aesop's fables. Now, fables are short little tales, usually about animals who can talk and take on human characteristics. It's called anthropomorphized characters. Now, these stories always teach some sort of a lesson. And in these simple stories with simple characters, Aesop's fables draw our attention to the ways that we can either succeed or fail based on our ability to analyze a situation we're in and our ability to keep our own greed or pride or selfishness from getting in the way of making wise decisions. Now, if pourquoi stories are about why, fables are about how. They teach us how to act in the world and the consequences of how we behave. Fables draw our attention to others who might try to trap us into unwise decisions, to beware of flatterers, others who play to your most self-centered instincts, your pride, your envy, your greed. Don't let others take advantage of you. Now remember, the tortoise didn't let the hare win the race, and the ants didn't share their corn with the thoughtless grasshopper. But do seek out ways to help others, lift the stone in the road, take the barb out of the lion's paw, and the goodwill will come back to you. In the last lecture, we heard a story by Rudyard Kipling about how the camel got its hump. Kipling also wrote a poem to go at the end of this folk story. And the poem is all about the lesson that the camel learned, and that we should also learn, when he said, "Humph," out in the desert instead of doing his work. Now, this fun little poem, it tells the lesson of the story Kipling related, and it has a lovely rhythm, and it's very musical. The camel's hump is an ugly lump, which well you may see at the zoo. But uglier yet is the hump we get from having too little to do. Kiddies and grown-ups too, if we haven't enough to do. We get the hump, camellious hump, the hump that is black and blue. We climb out of bed with a frowsly head and a snarly-yarly voice. We shiver and scowl and we grunt and we growl at our bath and our boots and our toys. The cure for this ill is not to sit still or frowst with a book by the fire, but to take a large hoe and a shovel also, and dig till you gently perspire. And then you will find that the sun and the wind and the gin of the garden, too, have lifted the hump, that horrible hump, the hump that is black and blue. I get it as well as you if I haven't enough to do. We all get the hump, camellious hump, kiddies and grown-ups, too. The delight of fables is that they use the power of story to help us learn about ourselves through the foibles of other creatures. After all, it's much easier to point out others' faults than it is to see them in ourselves. Many fables were told in ancient Egypt and in India, such as the story that Kipling recorded about the lesson the camel learned. However, in the West, the most classic fables are those recorded by the Greek writer Aesop. Now we'll start with a well-known classic, and then we'll talk more about Aesop himself. There once was a hare, a rabbit, who was so proud of his springy legs and powerful leap that he boasted everywhere that he was the fastest and no one else could catch him. One day, a tortoise, a turtle, slowly lifted his head and asked the hare if he wanted to race. The hare thought it was a good joke, but he agreed, and all the animals gathered for the big race. And when the fox, standing at the finish line, shouted, "Go!" the hare sprung into a sprint, and off he ran, leaving the tortoise loop-a-loop-a-loop-a-loop, waddling in the dust. And the hare, dun-dun-dun-dun, was quickly out of sight of the crowd and reached the halfway point easily. And because it was a warm day, he knew he had a good lead on the tortoise, and he stopped to play la-la-la-la-la, and then he decided to take a nap. And while he slept, loop-a-loop-a-loop-a-loop, along came the tortoise. And the tortoise looked at the sleeping hare as he waddled past him at the halfway point, and off he went plodding along, loop-a-loop-a-loop-a-loop, and pretty soon the tortoise was in sight of the finish line. Loop-a-loop-a-loop. He was about to cross the finish line. Loop-a-loop-a-loop. When the hare woke up, and he scratched himself, and he thumped the ground. And then he started back in the race at a sprint. Dun-dun-dun-dun! But the tortoise, loop-a-loop, had such a lead on him by that time. Loop-a-loop. By the time the hare came in sight of the finish line, dun-dun-dun-dun-dun, he was sprinting, dun-dun-dun, as fast, dun-dun-dun, as he could, dun-dun-dun. But the tortoise, loop-a-loop, was nearly there. Loop-a-loop, dun-dun-dun, loop-a-loop, dun-dun-dun, loop-a-loop. And the tortoise, loop-a-loop, he crossed the finish line first. And by the time the hare had crossed the line, da-dun! The tortoise was smiling with a winner's laurel wreath already sitting on his little tortoise head. The end. Has anyone ever said to you, slow and steady wins the race? Now, I've said it to myself many times, to remind myself that life is a marathon, not a sprint, and I need to keep at my tasks steadily if I'm going to succeed. Aesop's fables have been the source of many proverbial sayings. Now, Aesop was a slave in a household in the Greek city of Phrygia. Folklorists and cultural scholars suggest that Aesop's position as a slave, someone who has very little power in his culture, well, that would have given him a good perspective on how people use and abuse power positions over one another to get what they want. And with the lesson being that it always pays off to be kind to those people who are less powerful than we are. Now take this story, for instance, about a man named Androcles, who was a slave, like Aesop was, and how his kindness to others came back to bless him later in life. Androcles was a slave. He lived with his master in Rome many years ago. The master was a cruel man. Androcles did not have enough to eat, and he had to work very, very hard. One night, Androcles ran away. He crept along until he was outside the city walls. Then he ran until he was tired. He laid down on the soft grass and went to sleep. And in the morning, he looked round and he saw that he was near a forest. He knew there were wild animals in the forest, but he thought the animals would be no crueler to him than his master had been. Androcles was very hungry. He ate some nuts and berries and drank some water from a spring. He found a dark cave in the rocks, and he sat down in the cave and tried to plan out what he would do next. Suddenly, he saw a shadow across the low opening of the cave. He heard the roar of a wild animal. Androcles was a brave man, but the roar frightened him. He tried to run away, but the animal filled the low opening. Then Androcles saw that it was a lion. A great lion with one raised paw, and it moaned in pain. He had a thorn in the soft part of his paw. Androcles had often taken thorns out of the paws of his master's dogs, so he gently took the lion's paw in his hand. The lion sat very still while the thorn was being pulled out, and then he did just what the dogs had done, and rolled over and rolled over and over again in his joy. He licked the hands of Androcles and tried to lick his face. When Androcles left the cave, the lion followed him. The lion was a good hunter and caught small game for him. They lived together in the cave and became good friends. And one day, Androcles left the cave and walked by himself in the forest. Suddenly he was seized by soldiers from Rome. His cruel master had sent them to hunt for him. They took him back to Rome. He was put into prison. After many days, they took him out of prison. They took him to a large open place like a circus. There were seats on every side. The seats were full of cruel men and women. His master was there and his master's friends. They had come to see Androcles fight for his life with a hungry lion. Androcles stood still, waiting for the lion. All the people watched and waited. The cage door opened. Out rushed a hungry lion. Androcles was frightened, but he did not move. On came the lion, but just as he reached Androcles, he stopped and sniffed the air. And then with a joyous bound, he lay down at the feet of Androcles, his old friend, and Androcles stroked the head of the lion. And the lion licked the hands and the feet of Androcles. All the people watched. There was not a sound in the great place. And then a cheer went up as they saw that Androcles and the lion were friends, and all the people cried for him to tell them about it. And so Androcles told his story. And then he waited. He thought the cruel people might make him fight another lion, but the people did not feel cruel now. They shouted for both of them to be let free, and so Androcles and the lion went back to the forest together. Now, what lesson would you say that story teaches? Many times in Aesop's fables, we see that the gentler route, in this case, kind behavior, well, that's the path to getting what we want and to getting ahead in life. Sometimes it can even save our lives. The emphasis on being kind to one another is seen in another fable that's also attributed to Aesop. Now, this time there are no talking animals, but there's a clear lesson in the tale. There once was a kingdom. The kingdom had a palace with a road leading up to the palace, and in that palace sat the king. And the king had an idea. And the next day, the people in the kingdom found that in the middle of the road leading up to the palace, there was a large, hard, bothersome stone. The first one to see the stone was a farmer named Peter. And Peter sat on top of a heavy ox cart. It was a large cart pulled by 6 strong oxen. And the man, Peter, he marveled at how lazy the people were not to move this stone out of his way. And he took his whip, whoosh, and he drove his 6 oxen all the way around the stone, and down the road he went, grumbling to himself about how lazy the people of this kingdom were. Next came a soldier, and the soldier went down the road with a feather, bing, sticking out of his hat, a sword at his side. He was singing to himself. His head was held high, and his head was so stuck in the air that he didn't see the stone in the road when suddenly he had tripped over the stone and fell face down in the dirt. And he too marveled at how silly the people of this kingdom were for leaving a stone like that in the middle of the road, and he went walking down the road, no longer singing to himself, but grumbling to himself. And about an hour later, 6 merchants came down the road, each with a wagon full of goods that they were taking to sell at a fair. And when they came up to where that stone sat there smack in the middle of the road, they drove to one side or the other of that massive rock, and they said to themselves, they thought how lazy all those people are, and they grumbled to each other about how they had left that stone in the middle of the road, these lazy people of that kingdom, and on they drove on to the fair. Well, 3 weeks passed, and the stone stayed in the middle of the road, and finally, the king called all of his people in his kingdom together, the ox cart driver, the soldier, the merchants, everyone was called together to meet at the stone. And the ox cart driver and the soldier and the merchants all said to each other that finally the king was going to do something about these lazy people. And when the king arrived, he told the people that he himself had put the stone there 3 weeks earlier. And he reminded them that each of them had seen the stone and scolded his neighbor for not moving the stone. And with these words, the king himself lifted up the stone. And the villagers all looked underneath the stone, and they all saw a little iron box. And the king took the box, and there was a piece of paper tied to that box. And that paper read, "For the one who lifts the stone." And the king opened the box and turned it upside down, and out poured a beautiful golden ring, and 20 gold coins, clink, 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 tumbled down to the ground. And the king reminded them that any one of those people could have had the ring and the coins if they had moved the stone themselves, instead of asking or expecting their neighbor to do so. And he reminded them they would have helped their neighbor too. Sometimes helping others is the route to riches. Now, certainly many of Aesop's fables teach us how to build lasting relationships with one another. Androcles and the lion, they trust one another because of their kindness to one another. But other times, to save your skin, you've got to be crafty. There's a time for kindness and a time for cunning, as in this story. One night, a wolf caught a fox. The fox was frightened, but he wasn't too frightened to think of trying to get away from the wolf, and at last he thought of a plan. He said to the wolf, "I know you will eat me, I know, but I have a favor to ask before you do." "Well, what is that?" asked the wolf. "On a farm not far from here, there lives a man who has many cheeses," said the fox. "Every night I get a cheese, I take it home to my children. Please, let me get a cheese and take it home to them before you eat me." "Where are the cheeses?" asked the wolf. "Well, they are in a well in the man's yard." "In a well? How do you get them?" "Oh, I go down in the pail and I bring up a cheese," replied the fox. "Well, I like cheese," said the wolf. "I think I shall go with you now." This did not please the fox, for he had planned to escape by going alone. But there was nothing else to be done. "Very well, come on," he said. The moon was very bright that night, and the two crept along quietly, for they did not wish to be seen. And soon they came to the well. And the fox peeped in, and there was a little water at the bottom, and in it he saw the big, round, yellow moon. "Come and look, brother wolf!" cried the fox. "There is a big cheese in the well! It is as big as a mill wheel! Look, look, did you ever see anything so fine?" "Never," said the wolf. "Now, you go down in the pail," said the fox. "You can eat your fill." "No," growled the wolf. "You cannot play your tricks on me. You are the one who will go down. If you don't go down at once and bring me the cheese, I will eat you." "All right," said the fox. "I'll go down." And he jumped into one of the two pails, and soon, he was at the bottom. "Oh, it is a fine cheese," he cried. "Well, bring it up," growled the wolf. I can't," said the fox. "I cannot lift it. You will have to help me bring it up." "How am I to come down?" asked the wolf. "Get into the other pail, of course," said the fox. "You will come down safe and sound." The wolf jumped into the pail, and down it went. And as he went down, the fox came up. And as they passed each other, the fox called out, "Goodbye, brother wolf. You'll get there soon, and feast on cheese with the man in the moon." Things don't work out well for the wolf in that story, who gets tricked in the end by his own greed. Now, what lesson would you draw from that story? Animal characters take on certain predictable characteristics in fables and in other folklore stories. The fox is crafty and tricky. The lion is noble and powerful. And the rabbit is swift and proud. And the wolf, well, he's always hungry. We see these stock characters and their predictable behaviors in other folk tales, such as in the Pourquoi stories that we heard in the last lecture. The stories are in many ways simple, but that doesn't mean that Aesop's fables don't deal with the complexities of life. Now, these simple stories have lasted for many years because they teach lessons that we can apply to a host of complicated and fraught situations in our lives. Now, for example, some of Aesop's stories are targeted at the tensions of life, when we know the right thing to do, but we really don't want to go through the effort of doing it. Listen to this one. There was once an old farmhouse, and in the pantry of the old house were many good things to eat. There were cheeses and cakes and nice fat bacon. Mice love all these good things. So the old farmhouse was the home of many mice. There were grandfather mice and grandmother mice and sisters and cousins and aunts, and the mice had happy times. Until one sad day when somebody else came to live in the old house. This somebody was not a man or a woman or a mouse. Grandfather Mouse saw him first, and he hurried to his wife. "The big gray cat is here," he whispered. "Tell the others." So Grandmother Mouse crept from hole to hole, telling the news. "All our fun is over," said the mice. "Wherever we go, the big gray cat will go too." Grandfather Mouse called a meeting to be held in the kitchen at midnight, and all of the mice came and sat around in a circle. They sat as still as only mice can sit. And they talked, but no one could think of how to get rid of the big gray cat. And at last, the smallest mouse said, "Let us tie a bell around his neck. Then we shall always know where he is." "Good," said Grandfather Mouse. "Good, good," said all of the mice. And they all took paws and danced around together and round in a ring. And they were happy because they had found a way. But suddenly, a middle-sized mouse asked, "But who will tie the bell around the gray cat's neck?" The grandfathers and the grandmothers and the sisters and the cousins and the aunts looked at each other for a long, long time. And then they all crept back to their holes. Now, what lesson or moral would you put on that story? Sometimes we want the right thing to happen, but we just don't want to go to the effort or the risk of doing it. Have you ever wanted something, but you were daunted by the effort it would take to make that thing happen? Maybe you wanted to earn your allowance, but the thought of doing all your chores, it was less exciting. Maybe you wanted to climb a mountain, but the thought of getting in shape enough to get to the top, that was too exhausting. Having great ideas is one thing. Following through with those ideas is something very different, and we all experience these tensions in life. Now, let's end with one final fable, which concerns a familiar animal to many of us, a hamster. Now, as we said before, fables come from all over the world. This one is from Kenya. Once, long, long ago in Kenya, all of the animals got along. All of the lions got along with the goats. All of the goats got along with all of the other creatures and the cheetahs and even the little flies. Everyone had enough to eat, and everything, even the teeniest, tiniest gnat, was happy. Until one day, famine broke out in the land. There wasn't enough to eat, and all of the animals started to lose their minds, and it hit the flies first. And the flies, without enough to eat, they decided to start taking bites out of the other animals. And they started with the lions. At first they came over and they took a big old bite out of the lion. And the lion, what would you say if you were the lion?
That's about right.
That's about right? Say what you would say if you were the lion. Excellent. Well, he was angry, but you know what? The lion had no tail to swat away that fly. But on the fly went over to a goat. And took a big old bite out of the goat. And what would you say if you were a goat and had a big old... Very good. Let's all make that sound. And then the fly went on and took a big old bite out of a cheetah. What would you say if you were a cheetah?
Meow.
Let's all say that. Yeah. Meow. But neither the lion nor the goat nor the cheetah had any tail to swat away that fly, and so the flies were taking bites out of every animal. Finally, they decided to have a meeting to decide what should be done. And they went to Grandmother Hamster. And Grandmother Hamster had a plan. She decided, I will make tails. I will make a tail for everyone. Tomorrow morning you come and you will get your tails. Well, Grandmother Hamster had a little grandson. And the grandson decided that he wanted a tail too. Grandmother, when do I get my tail? Oh, you come tomorrow morning, and you will get your tail. Well, hamsters, if any of you know, when do they stay awake?
At night.
Very good. They're nocturnal. And so, during the night, that little hamster stayed up and played and danced and did everything that a hamster loves to do. But when the morning came, because he's nocturnal and not diurnal, instead of going to get his tail, fell fast asleep, because he thought, it is my grandmother, and she will give me my tail whether I am there or not. And so what did he do?
He kept on sleeping.
He kept on sleeping while all the other animals came to Grandmother Hamster. And the lion went to Grandmother Hamster, and Grandmother Hamster pulled out of her big bag a lion tail and gave it to the lion. And the lion take your tail. He took his tail and put it on, and that big lion tail, he swished it, swashed it, and he could bat off all of the flies with that powerful lion tail. And all the goats came to Grandmother Hamster, and she reached in her bag and pulled out her hamster tail, and he put it and he switched his little goat tail, and he could swish away with his tufty goat tail all of those flies. Well, the cheetahs, they came. And the cheetah came, and Grandmother Hamster, she pulled out a little cheetah tail, long and powerful, and stuck that cheetah tail on. Could get those flies right away from the cheetah. Well, the day passed, and all of the animals got their tails from Grandmother Hamster's bag. Soon enough, the evening came, the sun started to come down, and Grandmother Hamster was putting her bag away when who woke up?
The hamster.
The hamster. The little grandson hamster, and he went, and he went pattering over. Grandmother, where is my tail? And she looked in her bag. She'd given out most all the tails except for a tiny little piece of a tail. She said, this is all I have left. And the grandson, he was so disappointed, he took the tiny little piece of a tail. What am I supposed to do with a piece of a tail? Oh, and she said, well, you should have come sooner. I will see if I can find a better one for you, but that will have to do for now. And so he put on the piece of a tail, and he swished his little nubbin of a tail, but he couldn't swat off any of the flies with it. And she never found another tail. And that is why the hamster to this day has a short little nubbin of a tail. Do not expect to have special favors just because of who you're related to. We're going to continue the theme of how and why with our next deep question for oral folklore and fairy tales. Why are the good characters beautiful? How are beauty and handsomeness and aging portrayed in these stories? And why?